The wind tore across the Arizona plains with a keening howl, rattling the shutters of Clara, Whitmore's solitary cabin, and stirring up dust that danced like tiny specters in the moonlight. The night was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of dry leaves and the distant cry of a coyote. Clara stood by the window, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness, her fingers tracing the worn wood of the frame. She had always preferred the solitude of her cabin, far from the chaos of the towns, far from the petty greed and lawless violence that had cost her family so dearly. But tonight, she could sense that solitude was about to be shattered. Her instincts had never failed her, and the faint sound of hooves in the distance set her heart racing. She moved quickly but quietly to the door, listening. The pounding grew louder, more insistent, until she could make out the shapes of men riding through the dusty road. Deputies. Her chest tightened. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving shadows that seemed almost alive, and she felt a premonition, an unshakable feeling that someone needed help and that no one else would give it. Through the gloom, she saw them, 3 deputies dragging a young boy along the ground, his hands bound behind him, his legs stumbling over the uneven dirt. His face was bruised, swollen from blows, and his clothes were torn and dusty. Clara's stomach twisted, a mix of anger and fear gripping her. This child was defenseless, innocent, and yet these men treated him as though he were nothing more than an object to punish, a piece of property they could dominate. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Clara knew the law, or at least the twisted version of it that these men enforced. They would not hesitate to claim righteous authority while committing acts of cruelty. She had heard the stories, the rumors whispered across the plains about the violence inflicted on the Apache, about children taken, beaten, and punished without cause. And now, here was a living example before her eyes, suffering and alone, except for the chance encounter that would define this night. She grabbed her coat, a worn but sturdy rifle, and stepped into the cool night, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. She did not shout, she did not hesitate, she simply stepped forward, letting the moonlight illuminate her presence. "Stop!" Her voice rang sharp and commanding, cutting through the night like a whip. The deputies halted mid-step, startled. The burliest of them, a man named Carter, who had earned his reputation for brutality, sneered at her. "Mind your business, woman. Step aside. This isn't your affair." Clara's eyes locked onto his. She could see the flicker of uncertainty, the slight hesitation in the way he shifted. His weight. She knew then that courage, even from a single person, could make a difference. "It is my affair because it is wrong," she said, her voice steady. "This boy has done nothing to deserve your violence. Let him go." The boy, sensing a sliver of hope, looked up from the dirt. His dark eyes, wide with fear, met hers. In that instant, Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, heavier than any burden she had ever known. She could not stand by. She could not allow injustice to continue unchecked, not tonight, not ever. Carter laughed, a low, menacing sound that grated against Clara's nerves. "You think you can stop us?" he spat. "Do you even know who we are?" "I know enough," she replied, gripping the rifle tighter. Her hands did not shake. Her resolve did not waver. "And that is enough." The deputies moved closer, their boots kicking up clouds of dust, the boy stumbling with each step. Clara raised the rifle, not with the intention to fire, but with the intention to make them pause, to make them reconsider. In the silence of the night, the tension hung thick, almost tangible. Clara could see the boy's body trembling, could see his small frame recoiling from the blows he had suffered. And she knew, if she faltered, if she hesitated, the consequences would be devastating. Then, as if by fate, the boy twisted in their grip, slipping free for a brief, desperate instant. Clara's heart leapt. She lunged forward instinctively, pulling him behind her, shielding him with the barrel of the rifle as if her courage alone could deflect the cruelty they sought to impose. "Run!" she whispered, her voice low but urgent. "Get to the cabin. Hide. Don't let them take you." He obeyed, stumbling but moving with a growing determination born of trust. Clara followed closely, her breath steady, her mind calculating their next steps. She knew the deputies would not give up easily. They would come for him, come for her. But she refused to be intimidated. She refused to let fear dictate her actions. The boy's name was Little Hawk. He whispered it softly, almost reverently. Clara repeated it in her mind, committing it to memory, feeling the weight of his identity, his heritage, the connection to a people who had suffered for generations. She guided him through the shadows of the forest that bordered her cabin, moving silently, every sense alert. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, casting mottled patterns of light and shadow across the forest floor. She had grown up navigating these lands. Every tree, every rock, every subtle change in terrain spoke to her in a language of survival. By the time they reached her cabin, Clara's pulse had steadied, but her vigilance had not wavered. She ushered Little Hawk inside, bolting the door behind them and securing the windows. He sat on the floor, his head bowed, the weight of the night pressing down on him. Clara knelt beside him, taking a cloth to gently wipe the dried blood and grime from his face. "You're safe here," she said softly, though even she could hear the tremor in her voice. "For now, you are safe." Little Hawk did not speak, only nodded, his eyes glistening with tears that had not yet fallen. Clara could see the bruises, the swelling, the evidence of the cruelty he had endured. Her heart ached, but it also burned with a righteous fire. She had made a choice, and there was no turning back. That night, in the quiet of her cabin, she realized that courage was not about fighting battles you were certain to win. It was about standing up when it mattered most, when no one else would. Hours passed. Clara tended to his wounds, offered him food, and kept watch through the long, restless night. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but now it carried a sense of anticipation, a whisper of change. Something had been set in motion, something larger than herself, something that could not be ignored. And then, in the early hours before dawn, Clara heard it, the faint, distant sound of voices, growing louder, more numerous. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a trick of fatigue and worry. But then she realized it was real. Hundreds of voices, chanting and calling, moving in unison across the plains. Clara pressed herself against the window, heart pounding, counting as best she could. She gasped as the numbers crystallized in her mind. 176. 176 Apache warriors, moving toward her cabin. Not with weapons drawn in anger, but with purpose, with respect, with solidarity. Clara stepped back, breathless. She realized that her actions, her choice to protect a single child, had reverberated far beyond her own understanding. She was no longer just a solitary woman in a lonely cabin. She was part of something greater, something alive and unstoppable. And as the first warriors approached, a tall man with striking features stepped forward, bowing slightly in respect. "You protected our boy," he said, his voice calm but full of authority. "For that, we honor you. You are not alone." Clara felt a surge of awe, relief, and newfound determination. She understood that this night, with all its danger, fear, and courage, had changed everything. Her solitary stand had sparked something that could not be undone, had created ripples that would echo far beyond the plains, far beyond the moonlit darkness of this night. She held Little Hawk close, feeling the fragile pulse of hope growing stronger with each heartbeat. And as the Apache encampment settled around her cabin, a quiet understanding passed. Between them all, courage, when guided by justice and compassion, could move mountains. It could unite hearts. It could change destinies. And for Clara, standing amid the shadows and the voices of 176 warriors, it was the first time she realized the truth of a principle she had always believed but never truly tested. That one act, no matter how small, could ignite the courage of many, could create a legacy that would not fade with the passing of a single night.